Hello there. Welcome to Nowhere to Hide. I'm Brian Hyde. We're going to talk about the ongoing fight for medical freedom in Idaho. Now, you might be saying, well, now, Brian, didn't we just have a medical freedom law passed earlier? In fact, a couple of medical freedom laws passed this year. We did. And that's a great thing. And we're going to talk about those. But there are new threats and new ways that, people in power try to exploit that power. We're going to talk about that coming up next.
All reporters are biased, the Idaho Press Club are biased, all media, newspaper, radio.
To be completely blunt here, Brian, and there are plans to expand
indoctrination.
That's right.
Well, Idahoans are also concerned.
Horror shot. That line would be moving a little bit farther west.
I'm like crying.
Nobody wants to see
dark money is influencing policy in our state.
Well, that's not how this works.
Thank you once again for joining us for Nowhere to Hide. I'm going to show you a little graphic here, and I want you to notice that Idaho stands out in this graphic. Can you see? I know it's kind of small, but look at that. There's the whole United States, and this is depicting the estimated share of kindergartners with vaccine exemptions, meaning kindergartners who started school, but instead of showing, look, we took all the vaccinations. I don't even know how many there are these days. It's gone up so much from even when my kids were little. But these are the kids whose parents said, nope, we're going to opt out of that. And, you look at the United States, that kind of nice, mild peach color, that's the average. That's about 3.6% of kindergartners in many of the states, most of the states from the look of it, are exempted from vaccines upon entering schools. But then you start to see the states with the higher percentages. Those are portrayed in orange or maybe kind of a burnt orange. And then you have Idaho, which is up over 15%. And some people will look at this and they're going to be struck with horror, and they're going to be, feeling like, oh my goodness, Idaho doesn't care about its children. We just want them to have diseases and die from them because, we don't want to have, needles or whatever the case may be. And that's the problem with medical freedom, is too many people fixate on the idea of, well, does the science say this, or does the people in power say whatever? It all comes down to, do you have the right to give informed consent? And if something is being forced on you without your informed consent, in other words, if you're being pressured to do something against your better judgment, that's not a consensual thing. That's not a voluntary thing. And it's not right. So let's dive into this topic, and I'll show you a couple of examples of why we have to be ever so vigilant. Now, maybe you remember this, but this was just, about a week ago. We had Robert F. Kennedy Jr., the Secretary of Health and Human Services, here in Idaho. Look at these legislators who showed up to stand alongside him. You've got Speaker Mike Moyle, Representative Josh Tanner, Rob Bieswinger, who was one of the instrumental ones in helping us get our medical freedom bills passed in the last legislative session, as well as Jordan Redmond, State Senator Ben Tays. And you also see some health freedom advocates like Dr. Ryan Cole and Leslie standing here as they met with RFK Jr. and talked about health issues in Idaho. Now, here's the crazy thing about it. There are people who will say, well, this is about making America healthy again. It's not about, retribution for the mistakes or whatever they want to call it, the missteps we may have had during COVID. These are people who very much had skin in the game. Dr. Ryan Cole in particular, if you remember, the media establishment went after him, the medical establishment went after him, and in the end, they were trying to strip him of all of his professional licensure because he bucked the narrative. And I know that the mainstream press doesn't like to report this, so it's up to little old me and a few other independent outlets to do it. But in the end, who was proven right? It was Dr. Cole. There was no need to mandate shots that didn't prevent people from catching COVID or spreading COVID. And yet, the press still continues on looking for a reason to believe, some reason why these people who were focused on freedom, and that's really what they were focused on, not quackery, but freedom, why they have to be avoided at all costs and why they were so dangerous to us. It's frustrating to see the kind of mental gymnastics that people were willing to engage in order to push that COVID narrative and all the mandates that went with it. Let's get back to this story, talk about some of the things that are coming at us now fast and furious. So there was just a ruling, and this is Leslie Manukian's take on it, writing about the Ninth Circuit rules. Now, we had a very favorable ruling not too long ago that seemed to uphold your right to yes, you cannot have a vaccine mandated for you, but The Ninth Circuit, well, all 11 judges sat down instead of the regular 3-judge panel. And as you can see here, July 31st of this year, the Ninth Circuit issued its ruling in Health Freedom Defense Fund et al. Versus Megan K. Riley et al., vacating the earlier ruling of a 3-judge panel of the Ninth Circuit in favor of plaintiffs, Health Freedom Defense Fund, and California Educators for Medical Freedom, and several individual plaintiffs. So why would they do that? Well, here she explains to us the reasoning of the court in its latest ruling, as represented by Judge Bennett's majority opinion, is an affront to all who value truth, justice, the United States Constitution, and logic. Leslie tells us that incredibly, the court concluded that as long as a government official believes that a vaccine will protect public health, it's irrelevant whether the vaccine actually works. Can you see why this is a very legitimate and ongoing concern? See, armed with this rationale, she writes, a state government, simply by uttering the words, "This is for public health," can force any individual to submit to a medical treatment, even if that medical treatment doesn't benefit the individual and perhaps harms him. The implication of this line of thinking is clear. Government is our absolute ruler, our master, we are its chattel. And this is the kicker. It's not saying that every single vaccine is going to injure everybody or that it's not always going to work. But in the case of the COVID vaccine, I think reasonable people can agree, on the question, did everybody end up getting it anyway? The answer is yes, of course. So why the histrionics about, well, are you boosted? Oh, well, you should have listened to the medicine or the science, I should say. And anyway, Leslie says, by the court's logic, there is no limit to the power of the state, a conclusion that should terrify us all. Equally concerning, she says, the Ninth Circuit has abdicated its power and authority to hold public servants accountable. When the courts can't be relied upon to hold public servants accountable, who can? And where does that leave us? As Judge Lee wrote in the fitting conclusion to his powerful dissent, as a practical matter, he said, I fear we are giving the government a blank check to foist health treatment mandates on the people, despite its checkered track record, when we should be imposing a check against the government's incursion into our liberties. And that is really the key here. Look, you may disagree with Leslie Manookian and others who fight for healthcare freedom. You may disagree with Dr. Ryan Cole. You may disagree with RFK Jr. as the Secretary of Health and Human Services. That's fine. When they are promoting measures that restrict the ability of anybody, be it in government or even in private business, to force another individual to undergo some kind of medical intervention without their consent, that's wrong. That's period. It's wrong to force people to undergo medical procedures or interventions without their explicit consent. And as you can see, this court ruling shows that point of view still holds sway. And I don't want to give up my medical freedom. You shouldn't want to give it up either. But just understand that it's never a settled matter. It's never a matter of, well, Idaho passed a law, therefore we're out of the woods. So to that end, Leslie talks a little bit in a series of tweets. She has a really actual wonderful tweet thread that talks about the Idaho Medical Freedom Act and how the passage of that act is a revolution against the dark era of COVID mandates. And I agree with her. The only addendum I'm going to add here is that it's a beginning. And I think she means that as well. But it went into effect on July 1st and it outlawed medical mandates in the state of Idaho for almost all. And so she lists off the things that it accomplished. And you know what? She deserves to take a victory lap. I know she and many others worked very hard to make this happen. But she also talks about, here's what we have in store in terms of further securing Idaho health freedom. Now, again, you don't have to agree with these topics to understand. Is the person who is working to move this agenda forward, or the people and organizations who move this, are they trying to take more of your freedom from you, or simply prevent people from using the force of government to step over other people's freedom in the name of medicine? There's a big difference here. So banning weather modification geoengineering. You may think, it's no big thing. It's not even real. But it's real enough that there are some serious questions that have been asked. Just because it's not your pet topic doesn't mean it's not based in reality or deserving of a closer look. Banning mRNA shots in livestock. Why would we need to do that? Well, I don't know. Would anybody try to sneak stuff past us? Anybody in power? Just asking. If the answer is, I'm not sure, then maybe this is something we should look into more closely. Banning lab-grown meat. eliminating fluoride from drinking water, banning ultra-processed foods from SNAP program purchases. In other words, you can't buy junk food with food stamps. That actually seems pretty fair. I mean, that's not like, well, you can only get rice and beans, but why waste it on things that are actually harmful to the body? Also, encouraging regenerative farming to provide pesticide-free, nutrient-dense food, restricting the use of harmful pesticides. And she says 2026 is going to be even bigger and bolder. Will they achieve all of those goals? I don't know. But I want you to notice, none of those is about let's restrict the freedom of people to choose things for themselves. If you want to go and get those things, you can do it. But you can't use the state to force other people to do it because you think that's what's best for them. All right, let's talk about how this plays into money as well. I'm going to draw for a couple lines from Fred Birnbaum's article from back in April about how Medicaid is still unfinished business. This is one of the things that people need to understand. In fact, we'll probably have to do a whole program just on this alone. There is no more dominant industry represented in politics in terms of lobbying than the medical establishment. That is true in Idaho. I believe it is true in most other states. And I believe, if the numbers I've seen are correct, that has been true for the last 27 years. What happened in healthcare that suddenly we have this huge, merging of government and medicine? Well, you remember back to the Clinton administration. That was one of the big things that they were trying to do was, get healthcare and medicine. Well, there's been a lot of progress on that. And so when you hear about the healthcare lobbying organizations and institutions, they have immense power at the legislative level. And that's something that you definitely need to keep in mind. So when it comes to Medicaid, the reason I bring this up is because Medicaid is effectively a transfer portal for a huge portion of the federal spending that goes into Medicaid, just goes directly into those healthcare sectors. It's because that's where their lobbyists want it. Now, that doesn't mean that there isn't need, like people who are poor or underprivileged or underemployed or something like this who need help. It's kind of the insurance of last resort, if you will. But the state is offered these perverse incentives of, well, if you spend $1, the federal government will give you $9 more, and people think, oh, it's free money. How can we lose? Well, the problem is you get people dependent. So a couple quick excerpts from Fred Birnbaum. We'll wrap this up. Idaho still has a budget problem, Fred says. Despite significant process on the spending front of the 2025 legislative session, the biggest government program with the biggest budget in Idaho's history, Medicaid, went unscathed. Now, he says over fiscal year 2026, Medicaid budget appropriation came out to $5.25 billion. That is 37% of the $14.1 billion state appropriation for all programs in Idaho. That includes education, public safety, every other function of state government. Only one program, Medicaid, dominates Idaho's budget. Now, Fred says, look, there are just three ways you're going to reduce the explosive growth of Medicaid. You either reduce the number of people on the program, you reduce the number of services they receive, or you pay providers less for those services. But he says to truly reverse the excess budget, there has to be some combination of these three changes. And the Idaho Freedom Foundation has talked about it before. We look forward to the day when the legislature tackles these core issues. So not only fighting for your medical freedom, but also fighting for fiscal responsibility when Medicaid becomes, a government administered insurance program that takes up an immense amount of the state budget. All things to keep an eye on. That's what I'm here to do. I'm here to help you with that. I'm Brian Hyde, and this is Nowhere to Hide.
All reporters are biased. The Idaho Press Club are biased. All media, newspaper, radio.
To be completely blunt here, Brian, and there are plans to expand
indoctrination.
That's right.
Well, Idahoans are also concerned.
Horror shot.
That line would be moving a little bit farther west.
I'm like crying.
Nobody wants to see
Dark money is influencing